Today we're having Eric Bear and Barb Teasley. Is that Barbee Teasley? Here originally from the tablet group, and they're now working on a project called Xeel. Barb is actually in the tablet group working on user research and usability, kind of cross-cultural, focusing on cross-cultural design, I guess. And Eric's been working on and they've both been working together on the Xeel project, which looks at hardware, software, sort of integration across devices, and they've been working closely with Steve Kaneko's team in the Windows group. So, Eric, I'm going to come up here, Barb.
Thanks, Lily. Does this work? Is this on? Do I need to flick some switch or something? It's on? You can hear me? Great. So, well, thanks for having us here to talk to you guys. We've been kind of making the rounds with a number of product groups around the company, and this is chance to talk to you guys who are thinking kind of steps ahead of what the product groups are doing. I'm coming up on 1 year in 2 weeks here at Microsoft, and before joining Microsoft, I ran an interface design company called Monkey Media, and my name was Eric Gould. So some of you may recognize from publications and such me as Eric Gould, but I am Eric Gould Bear now. And so I was the user experience manager for Tablet PC. That's what brought me up here, and kind of broadened my horizons looking at interdisciplinary and interdivisional projects. And Xeel was kind of this transition project that brought me from tablet to the Windows Hardware Experience Group and the design innovation group within that. So our theme, if you look at the top here, says that over time, consistent hardware defines intuitive interaction. And that's not a particularly inspiring thing because it means that even if the design is bad and you use it over time, well, it'll be intuitive so that when we test on it in the future, you'll be able to learn quickly on new devices. So given that, that's kind of the baseline that says this is what will happen if we don't use our heads. So let's use our heads and then leverage that to our advantage. This talk, we'll talk some about the Xeel project. I'll give you a little framework to some of the other things going on inside the Windows Hardware Innovation Group. Barbie will talk about the user research that we've done to date and give a little demo, some examples, and then we can chat about it and see what kind of things come up for you guys to look at either next steps for us or next steps for you. So the Windows Hardware Experience Group, headed up by Tom Phillips. I'm in the design branch of that, run by Steve Kaneko. And we're looking at the hard-soft integration side of what makes the overall user experience not just a sensible one, but a meaningful and engaging for people. And we're starting out looking at the desktop experience. So Longhorn hard and soft, well, what we ship at Microsoft is the software, trying to bring together the hardware manufacturers with the software to have an integrated design process. And looking at companies like Apple as a model where they can bring together the hard and soft together at the same time. So a few of the things that we're looking at to start out are, for Longhorn specifically, refining the user model around power buttons, an instant on security button, biometrics for login, authentication, a number of things with RTC, from annotation to integrated telephony, so high-quality speakers and microphones and cameras built into even baseline machines. Notifications, so how should notifications work on the desktop when you're mobile in different states and different contexts? What sorts of indicators and auxiliary displays are appropriate at different times and places? Navigation, which is what this talk is about. So this is kind of the first of a number of cross-company efforts that are going on. Media transport and any remotes that might relate to media transport. Multi-mon, which is a real hot topic these days, is something that we're involved in as well. Tablet docking raises lots of issues having to do with multi-mon, having to do with multiple HIDs, and how do they cross between CPUs, what happens when you have a mouse and a pen simultaneously. And then interesting issues around portable personal storage. So that's just some of the framework. And then to give you a picture of this is just kind of like one step in this set of issues. So for Xeel, there are a number of different products which we either have out or we're about to come out with that have dedicated buttons for interaction or benefit from buttons for interaction. So things like the eHome remote or the smartphone or the Zenith watch all can only be controlled using buttons, whereas a tablet or a pocket PC or a Mira, you can use a pen, but it's really helpful to be able to do some casual interactions with buttons. So each of these devices, though, has their own program management structure and development program and design specification. So what I've taken on with this program is looking at how can we be consistent across all these different products to get a consistent navigation scheme in place that will benefit users from, well, a usability standpoint. One is that if you use one and move to another, it should be easy to transfer and not have to relearn or think, oh, this one is that way, and no, this one is kind of upside down and twisted. And then the second goal of this is somewhat of a reach and somewhat of a question we really don't know, is maybe there's a market advantage to having these things be consistent. Maybe we can increase the cross-sell. If you buy one Microsoft product and, oh, I know how to navigate this device, well, that means I want to buy the Microsoft phone because it's going to be easier. And once I've got the Microsoft phone, I want to get the Microsoft watch because it's consistent. So there should be other things that drive those decisions, but consistent navigation should be one of those things that we can tick off really easily. Yeah?
Has that been true for Sony?
Sony's an interesting case, and we compare against them because they've tried to do this. If you look at a lot of Sony products, am I talking too fast?
No.
All right. They've got wheels on them, the little jog wheel, and that was an attempt to be the Sony signature. Now, it is a signature in that, yeah, they've all got wheels, but if you do a real quick heuristic evaluation, it doesn't even have to be that much. Heck, you know, they're not working the same way, and they're not doing the same things, and that's in part because they don't own the operating system on which these things run. So they're kind of hacking things up on top and not being consistent. So
what I meant is, has it limited their success?
Say again?
What I meant is, has it limited their success?
Has it, the fact that it hasn't been consistent? Probably not. Probably not.
Whereas Nokia's consistency probably has increased their success. Yeah. Debating.
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I mean, so Nokia's made a move from having a red and a green button to only having a single button to start and end calls. Well, what does that do to the user model, and how can we reconcile that? It's kind of a good question. I'm going to give you a few scenarios to give you a picture of, in your mind, of some of the different contexts for which this applies. Use a prop here. So a tablet PC user sits in a meeting reviewing a report that was distributed prior to the meeting, and after that reads her email during the presentation without ever touching the screen with a stylus. On the bus, a Zenith user scans the news headlines, wondering if or when the market's going to recover. At home, a Mira user sits on the couch, one hand on the golden retriever, reading the New York Times, flipping through with one hand on that tablet device. Standing in line at a coffee shop, smartphone user retrieves a phone number of a client and makes the call, checks to see if the parts arrived on time, all using one hand, just buttons. In an 8x12 dorm, an eHome user browses her playlist, finds something that will inspire late-night work. And kind of the holy grail of all of this is that a shopper can walk into a computer superstore walk up to an aisle full of brand new class of product, pick it up, and be able to use it without any manual and knows how to navigate. So Casio, coming back to the theme, Casio defined what became intuitive wristwatch interfaces some time ago, back in the late 70s and early 80s. Now, if you took a novice wristwatch user, which is somewhat of a strange thing to say, and put them in a lab and give them a Casio wristwatch that's got the standard 4-button navigation model, it's not going to be intuitive. So it's not intuitive from the a priori standpoint, but it is this combination of nature and nurture that you see that any of us that have worn a Casio wristwatch for a few years, even if we've switched to something more fashionable and then come back to Casio, you can pick it up and use it because those 4 buttons and their modalities and their ways of controlling are kind of built into the body. And this is what we see as a similar opportunity for Microsoft, that we've got so many button-based products that are coming to the fore in the next short period of time. So to that end, I created 2 task forces to look at this issue. One was focused on the hardware side of things, and one was focused on the software side of things. The software task force looked at what are the key functions that are necessary to be able to navigate on all these different devices. So if we limit the set and we come up with this kind of scalable model for interaction, what are those going to be, regardless of how they're, regardless of hardware? And then the hardware group was looking at, given that set of software functions, what are some of the ideal mechanisms that can be employed to map onto those and provide OEMs kind of a suite of options that we think work well for that mapping. These 2 groups have come together a couple months ago because at a certain point you can do just so much with hardware and software without treating them as an integrated process. And what we're doing is we're targeting Longhorn time frame. So the Longhorn for the desktop and tablet V2, and then all the other products that get revved by that point in time that we've got a consistent story for navigation. Give you a functional snapshot here before diving into some more details, but to give you a picture in mind. So the bare minimum set has 4 buttons, or 4 functions. You need to be able to step up or move up through content, step down, move down through content, enter to take action on a particular item or go deeper, and then get out, which could be back or could be escape. Now, when you go from a single-paned interface, like on the watch or on the cell phone, to a multi-paned interface, like in Outlook, you need to be able to move from pane to pane. So we've added the concept of skip previous and skip next to move from context to context. And you see that this is a single wheel that combines all 4 directions in one. And it's not symmetrical on those 2 dimensions in that the up and down is a continuous interaction where you can move an up and down items or scroll up and down, and discrete interaction on the left and right to jump from panes. So again, we've got enter and out. And then 2 other functions that people found useful in our testing were a switch to be able to move from application context to application context, like Alt-Tab or Alt-Escape. Something in between those works better when you have a single button as opposed to a 2-button chord. And a concept of more, which in an eHome or a Zenith context is like a drill down, tell me more about the particular item I'm on. And in the Longhorn desktop tablet space, it's the contextual menu on the item in question. And so this layout on the right is, in fact, the preferred embodiment that we've gotten to for the tablet PC. And depending on the device, those things will lay out differently and be oriented for the ergonomic motion of the hand and what fits into the particular space. So the program goals, on the one hand, are real simple. They're real small in that, hey, we're trying to get this small set of buttons to work right. And on the other, it's this kind of fairly hairy and lofty goals to get all these groups across the company to be coordinated and work together and ship products that work the same way. So it's a small, easy to use set of controls specifically for navigation and information consumption. It scales across all the important applications, all the key media types, fits all the different device platforms and form factors and body types and hands. It's built on the success of the mouse wheel. Doesn't mean that it has a wheel in it, because it certainly works with a button-only interface, and then there's wheels of different sizes and shapes and other types of devices like knobs. The car folks are looking at different kinds of things that work well for them. But all the kind of cognitive, emotional, ergonomic, functional factors which made the wheel on our mice make us so much money kind of are things that we should be taking advantage of. And of course, it's got to be reliably and consistently implemented at 3 levels. One is at the operating system level and all the APIs and support, at the ISV and all the software applications that ship on top of that, and then with the OEMs and the ODMs in the platforms that it runs. So things that are not goals for us, we're not trying to be a replacement for random roam devices like mice or pens. We're not trying to allow you to do everything that you can do on a full Longhorn PC. So in order to do everything, you do pick up your random roam device and use that. And specifically, we're not trying to accommodate data production or content creation. So contrast reading email versus writing email, and reading specifications in Word versus writing those kind of documents. And one that's a little bit harder to measure is that if we can, this can be a point of differentiation from Linux. That on the same boxes that Linux runs, well, there's this magic that happens between the Microsoft hardware and the Microsoft software. Not sure exactly how we do that, but it's something that we need to be attentive to. Yeah.
It makes sense not to allow writing, but what about yellow underlining for future action? I go to the document, I keep my yellow pen at hand.
Yes.
Equivalent of that?
Right. Well, if so that's what we'll get to, and Barbie will talk about, is some of the multimodality where you can do the casual navigation with the button interface and then have the pen in your hand to be able to do that kind of marking. So that you get the right balance of the right device and use them in conjunction with each other.
Excuse me, are you going to talk about speech input as well?
No, we're not going to talk about speech input. This is this is a very limited interface for discrete interactions, for kind of quick navigation, and in some ways it's this casual interaction. So when that is fairly low cognitive load to engage, and it doesn't mean it doesn't work well. It can work as a complement with speech or with pens and things like that. So what helps us justify this as an area to put so much attention on? Aside from usability, which can get fuzzy, and market needs, which can get fuzzy. Well, we've been through 3 rounds of usability, which Barbie will talk about. We found that participants learn to use the Xeel quickly. They see its advantages. They judge the combination on a tablet of a pen with the buttons as a highly useful combination. And they seem willing to pay more to have dedicated navigation buttons on a tablet than to buy a tablet on its own. So they want to pay more. They want that functionality so they can use those multi-modes together. The mapping that we've got is not hardware specific, which means OEMs can put different kind of control device on it and differentiate from each other. And they can one-up each other on the way it's implemented at the same time as providing users a consistent mapping. And that's a really important point, both for the OEMs and for end users. I mentioned the potential for cross-sell. And the other one that kind of makes us a make or break is the fact that we're already something like 80 or 90% there. Now, that's a number out of thin air. But as we look at the implemented base of products that are shipping or about to ship, a lot of the stuff is really compliant. Now, that's the 80 to 90% that's easy. The last 10 to 20% is going to be the real hard one. And there are some challenges that we have in discrepancies. We run into some of those with eHome, with Pocket PC, are two that are really calling out. The watch is great, 100%. So this is going to require more cleanup than a lot of new design. So it's really fixing inconsistencies and evangelism with the hardware vendors to get them to build these supporting devices that let people do the functionality. So in contrast to Sony, who tried to do this, this is really the first native interface across all these different platforms to do this. And same point, just kind of hammering it home here, is that people don't have to learn a new one. Then they can be more engaged in the substance of their lives instead of figuring out how to navigate. Pulled together a few of these devices into this table. There's a lot more devices, obviously, but a few of them just to look at kind of an a priori comparison of the terminology that's being used by folks and what functions are or are not needed at different scales. So from the small single-screen devices down from the watch up to the phone to an eHome at a 10-foot distance to the Mira and tablet PCs. Now, of course, the tablet PC is going to be completely compliant because this project was initially funded and they're all signed on to begin with. The Mira is going to mirror what tablet does pretty directly. And we come to the far side. The watch doesn't need as many functions to get around. It's a small single-paned interface. So the concept of up and down is our previous or next view, enter to go deeper, and channel to pop us out and change context. So channel is interesting. It's like switch. And if we look at those terms across, we've got on the watch, we call it channel. On Stinger, we call it home. On eHome, it's guide, which is the EPG. And in Longhorn, it's switch between applications. The telephone does have an up, down, left, and right. And for enter, they call it OK. Out, they call it back. What we've got for out in Longhorn is a combination of out, is a combination of back and escape. So in different contexts, if you have a history, then it'll take you back through history. If you don't have history, then it'll dismiss the current window or do a slightly stronger escape or a slightly weaker Alt F4, if you will. The eHome becomes somewhat of a challenge for us because they do have two-dimensional grids at the same time as having multiple panes. So they'll have a grid on one side and a list of functions on the side. And you need to be able to move left and right and up and down and get to that other view. So what we've simplified to primarily an up and down set of interactions and then left and right to change views means that they need to use a D-pad and use a switch next previous context. So gives you a picture of some of the challenges that we've had to face. When it comes down to priorities and say, what does it mean to be Xeel compliant? Yeah?
Do you see that as being consistent? Call that consistent, or would you not?
Well, that's a good question. So what's the cutoff for consistency? And on devices, so on devices that don't have, it's a yes and no, right? So there's places in which if you use different terms, but you work the same way, so it's in the body the same, then it's consistent. But if these devices now have user assistance and documentation that goes along with them, and it refers to them differently, and we have terms that are associated with them, well, maybe that provides somewhat of a conflict. It would be best if we could get them all to be consistent through and through. I kind of count the successes in little steps. But I don't think, from the previous chart, I don't think the work isn't done. That's certainly clear. Yeah.
Are there any clients who want to overload the buttons with multiple buttons?
We haven't had a whole lot of overloading. The watch is an interesting example because the channel button does two things. It does out and it does switch. So it pops you up and it allows you to move. So it does one and then the other. But it works smoothly, so it's not particularly an issue. And the same thing there, enter, is kind of a combination of enter and more. But at a certain point, it's moot. I mean, it doesn't really, that level of distinction doesn't matter so much. I think if we get into modalities, when you're in one context and they do one set of things, and you go into another context and they do a whole different set of things, well, there are certain modalities that we're supporting in the specification and we're recommending. But if you go and change the whole thing so that it's not consistent, then it's questionable. The important thing is that when people want to be extending the spec, is that we keep coming back to the central kind of spec review group that says, oh, okay, eHome wants to extend it in this way, and the Auto PC also wants to extend it in this way, but slightly differently. Well, we all get in the room, we make sure that Auto PC and eHome are talking so that we're extending it consistently across the company. So that kind of brings it back to the priorities. The first set of things that to be compliant are that you've got a concept of stepping up and down, whether that's moving up and down items or scrolling the view or paging the view up and down, and then being able to take immediate action on the current item through enter and then get out of that context. Pry 2 comes with the multiple panes and skipping next and skipping previous context chunk. And then depending on the particular device in question would determine whether this next set is Pry 2 or Pry 3, is to be able to switch among whole applications and that drill down, get more detail. Things that are clearly Pry 3 for us in the 2004 timeframe, which we may not be able to get to, not particularly hopeful, are things like high-resolution scrolling, converting flick gestures from a run of step-ups to something like a page-up, acceleration curves, things like that. So get the basics and then move on. So what we're dependent on in order to be successful are obviously the partner support across the company, people continuing to commit to cooperate even as they move towards their deadlines and feel that pressure to keep coming back and saying, hey, we need this new functionality. Are we doing it consistently with each other? Commitment to dog food, the interactions. So we've done is we've built a number of prototypes. We'll have 100 of dog food prototypes, a fairly small snap-on units, USB plug-and-play that will snap onto the side of tablet PCs or laptops or a keyboard if you don't have a laptop, and get people using this. Get this out to the key program managers and designers primarily, so that as you're reviewing and using the product that you're responsible for shipping, you see where it doesn't work. And it's kind of a brute force evangelism, because when it does work, it sings and it makes you happy and smile. And then you get stuck in a place where, oh, I can pop up a contextual menu in Outlook, but can't dismiss it. Kind of got to fix it. Evangelism outside, and a set of new app commands that support being able to have modal functions in different contexts. So I'm going to hand it over to Barbee to talk about our user research.
as Eric made clear in his introduction, this program initially grew out of the tablet PC initiative. And so as we began doing user research, we focused first on the tablet PC. And obviously, as we move along, we need to start looking at these other devices as well. But here's where we are to date is 3 studies that we have done that I want to tell you about. In all the studies, we use kind of a similar method where we ask them to take prototypes of the devices and do common everyday tasks, such as frequent tasks, such as scanning your email, going into Word, browsing on the web, that sort of thing. And in all cases, we used my psychology roots, I want to say within subjects design, but we try to be politically correct and call them participants. I guess that sounds a little more friendly. And anyway, within participants design, which means that each participant we brought in tried out all the different Xeels in a counterbalanced order and so on, so that they could do a comparison contrast among the different devices. And they were all small N types studies. The issues we're getting at, of course, is usefulness. If people don't find this useful, then let's don't move ahead. They got to find it useful. They got to see the use in it. They got to see, oh, this can really help me. And of course, ease of use and ease of learning are important as well, but not without usefulness. It's great if it's easy to use and easy to learn, but it has to be useful too. And related to all that as well, what's the optimum button set, user preferences, and so on. So our first study, there's a nice picture of the setup that we had for the first study. It was a tablet PC, but used in a laptop mode. So actually, participants weren't even particularly aware that it was a tablet. And it had the prototype just laying to the side of it there. Of course, in the future, this will be built into the actual device itself, the buttons. But for this, we just had it laying to the side there. And we compared, it was always that same device, but we compared 3 different function mappings. One we called a minimal set, and if you'll recall one of Eric's earlier slides, he had the minimal set off on the left side, where it's basically the up, down, enter, out kind of combination. So we had the buttons active for that in one set. And then let me go all the way to the right there where it says the less modal version with a wheel. What we did was we added a wheel from a mouse to handle the scrolling. So in other words, rather than overloading the up-down buttons with scrolling as well, we said, okay, here's the scroll wheel. It works just the way scroll wheels always work. And then the up-down button will take care of arrow up, arrow down events. So that was motivated by, if those of you that are familiar with usability guidelines understand that modalities are typically create usability problems. It makes it cognitively more difficult for people to learn and to use. So the goals were to determine the optimum number. Was 5 enough? Were those 5 functions enough, or do we need more functions for a tablet or a PC? Remember, the conclusions I'm talking about are related to tablet or PC and not necessarily a watch or a phone. And compare the different modal behaviors. So just to make clear that I'm guessing you've already got this idea, but the idea is that up-down buttons, the way they work, depend on the software context you're in. So in some contexts, they act as arrow up, arrow down, for example, in an inbox. In other cases, they might work as scrolling up and down, for example, browsing the web, and page up, down, let's say if you were in the print preview mode of Word. That would be an example of that. Or if you were using the out button, in the context, if you had an email open and you press out, it'll close up that email and take you back to the inbox. But if you hit out in the browser mode, it takes you back historically. So that's modal. That means you have a modal user interface. As I mentioned, basically the concept was take the participant through a bunch of tasks. using the tablet in tablet mode. That is, so they couldn't see the keys particularly. We wanted to force them to use the Xeel as much as possible. They didn't have the keyboard. They didn't have the mouse. They had the mouse wheel in some cases, but not the mouse. Force them to use the Xeel as much as possible, which is rather unnatural, but this was the first study, and we wanted to see, proof of concept. Can people navigate with the Xeel? And, of course, as you have people do things like navigate your inbox, we can think of it in a more abstract way. What are they doing? Well, they're going through lists. They're going among panes. They're going through a document. They're following links. So there's different kind of navigation elements that you encounter as you do these different tasks. And so at the bottom, that's kind of what we were looking at. So we found that the participants were highly successful in navigating even with the minimal set, to the point where we were initially going to gather data on success rate, but we just quit doing that. The success rate was so high, essentially they could always succeed to the extent that the software would allow it. And so we just said, okay, that's not worth spending our time recording success. So very successful. We asked them questions about ease of use and ease of learning, no difference among the three devices. However, we did conclude, based on their comments and the sort of roadblocks that they'd encounter, when using the minimal set, that it really just doesn't cut it in a tablet or laptop type environment. It doesn't give you that richness of navigation that you really need. And this, surprising to me, at least, was that the mobile version was more preferred than the version with the mouse wheel added on. And I can only speculate on the reasons. Maybe it's just too many buttons, too many things to move your hand around on. Just too much. Somehow it was just too much for them. So they preferred, it was the second in preference, but it was not the most preferred. So even though modal buttons, I can't prove that modal buttons increase learning time, but let's say modal buttons, plenty of research has shown that modality adds cognitive load. So modality adds cognitive load, but apparently it wasn't that much. And what appeared to be the real problem was the hurdles that they encounter using these devices due to kind of inconsistencies between the different software applications, or even within applications you'll encounter inconsistencies. And the kind of thing that I'm talking about is, for example, the way you open, expand, and contract hierarchical lists in the task and operates differently even within Outlook. So in one case it's enter, and in another case it's right and left arrow. So that's one. And then another example is if you're using the Xeel and the software as it is today, here in your inbox you can open up your attachments by hitting the more button and getting to a command that lets you do that. If you've got an email open, you cannot open your attachments using the Xeel device as it is today. So that's the kind of thing that the participants kind of going, huh? Just the place I want to open my attachments I can, and the place I don't want to open them I can't. So that's the kind of thing that needs to be cleaned up.
The events from the applications,
Pardon?
how were you mapping what was happening on the buttons to what was happening inside the application?
Standard key events.
Down, tab, shift tab, enter, and app command back with a shell hook that sends escape.
How does this differ from the fact that you could have used the keyboard for exactly the standard keys that you have to train people with additional text on the keys that says, oh, you already have all these keys that you're trying to build. These are custom buttons, but you could have used keyboard keys like escape, up, down, page up, page down, all these different things. So what was the reason to go with a separate set of buttons as opposed to making them?
Well, sure, because most of the contexts that we're talking about don't have keyboards.
If you're in the tablet mode,
Or in the,
you know,
Or
if
you're
you're
on a-
sitting on the plane using your tablet, or as Cynthia's doing, sitting here in a meeting with her tablet open, you know, you don't want to have your desk your thing up and using the keyboard. You know, it's much handier to just have it on your lap.
And when you get to the keyboard, though, we're talking with the hardware folks. If you guys have seen the Office keyboard that has a number of functions on the left-hand side, is revving those to be the Xeel set of functions, so they're all collected in a common place.
where you can use the keyboard. This
You can't, yeah, so a free benefit of getting people to clean up their software act to be Xeel compliant is that all the accessibility software for people with you know, a variety of I/O challenges will now have consistent mappings across all those applications.
Oh, yes.
One thing that seems incompatible between the keyboard interface and the Xeel interface is the enter key on the keyboard. Like if your focus is on a checkbox or a radio button, the enter key on a PC will press the default push button, but it needs to, in the Xeel scenario, the enter key needs to toggle the checkbox, which is what the space does.
So we're working with the important point is that the space bar is missing, and we're working with Shell to be able to make dialogues fully navigable with Xeel. So
What you're looking to is make Windows change so that when you press the enter key, it toggles the checkbox?
Toggles the checkbox if you're on that control group, and when you're down in the set of controls which are, you know, your OK and cancel, enter would act on the one which is currently in focus.
And it doesn't mean the space bar still wouldn't work. You could leave this. For those that have that habit, the space bar
Right.
could still, and you have a keyboard, the space bar could still work. So it's not that you suddenly your old habits don't work. I think
Well,
there's
if
a
your
solution that allows you to use your old habits and
Your old habit for the enter key wouldn't work the way it used to, which is I press enter and it closes the dialog with an OK.
Yeah, so you might be a step away. It's a question of when the dialog comes up, what's in focus by default. It's the enter key so you can execute it right away. If you want to go and change those functions using only the dedicated buttons, you can do that, but then you have to navigate back to the OK button.
yeah.
So in your third configuration, you had the wheel, right, for scrolling. So instead of the wheel, did you guys ever do these with rings, like the iPod has?
No, but we're coming up on a wheel that takes care of the up, down, and the skip next, skip preview.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, we evaluated several dozen devices. In fact, the iPod was one of them that we looked at. Because this came from tablet, a ring-like device was simply impossible to implement unless we put it on the back side of the tablet. So we didn't actually go down that route. But we went down because of the size. We looked at some miniaturized rings that Panasonic has. They still didn't seem to be... rings present other issues. I mean, the iPod, it kind of works. You get this concept of up and down. But because it doesn't have a specific orientation, you can run into some mental mapping challenges.
But that's one of those areas where the OEMs can say, hey, I want to do a ring, and then they can, if they can map it, make it map to this, they go for it, make it fit. In study 2, we wanted to do something that was more realistic around what we see as the actual scenario of usage. So we gave people the pen as well as a Xeel device and asked them to use it together in a tablet environment. So, and we threw in some additional navigation elements that we hadn't tested before, some more complex elements like hierarchical lists and so on. And we had 2 different form factors. The method was similar to study 1 with the idea that they're going through familiar day-to-day type tasks. And in this case, we ended up with 5 different conditions, using the pen alone to do the task, using only the button device, the button Xeel to do button version of the Xeel, the same one that was used in study 1, alone to do the task using a wheel Xeel, not the mouse wheel, I'll show you in a minute, and pen, and then the pen with the button wheel and pen with the wheel, 5 different conditions. And so you can see in the upper right is the same physical prototype that was used in study 1, which has, I kind of call it the remote control model. It has a lot of buttons on it. On the left is a device, and unfortunately this picture doesn't show it very well, but right under that person's thumb is a rotating wheel, so it goes up and down, similar to the wheel on a mouse. But it also, you can click it to the right or click it to the left, and there's a switch under there, so it recognizes discrete events of press left, press right, which we translated into skip left, skip right. And anything, the pen with the Xeel and pen alone, they judged all 3 of those conditions as highly useful, with no difference among them. All were judged easy to learn. The pen alone, they thought was slightly easier to learn than the Xeel devices, and you know, it would take further study to figure out exactly why that is. But you know, anybody that's used a pen, I think it's very intuitive. It's just you touch. It's kind of, you get to just touch what you want to do, and it just feels very natural. Whereas these Xeels, you know, it's probably a newer concept for them. And these were people, you know, the profile of participants was knowledge workers and so on.
When you did your testing, did you allow the user to situate the buttons on either side of the device for left and right-handed?
Yes.
So they can select that.
Yeah, in fact, for the first study, I had specifically gotten the recruiters to get me half left-handed and half right-handed, which was a nightmare for them. And we got them in there, and all of them said, well, I've just taught myself to do everything right-handed. So I was like, well, you know, it didn't really give me anything. But I have a picture for you that you're going to like. So they really liked the combination of using the pen and the Xeel together, because it felt like it gave them all the advantages of each approach, of a simple, I can touch to make things happen, but when I'm in a lay back and kind of consume mode, I can just use the Xeel. I don't have to use, I don't have to have the keyboard open so I can get to my touchpad. I don't have to have my mouse attached. I can navigate with those 2 things together very effectively, and I'm not obscuring the screen by taking the pen and holding it across the screen either. So I can use it when I need it. I can use the pen when I need it. I can use the Xeel for everything else. And this last bullet point may be a little subtle here, but the point was that because the software, as I say, for example, in email, you can't open an attachment from an open email. The user expectations about how to do things like that was matched the Xeel specification. So when they'd try to do something, we'd say, well, what did you just try to do? And they say, well, I tried to use step to get over to this object here. And it wouldn't work. Or a good example is columns in the File Explorer, columns of icons. They'd say, well, it didn't work. And so that's what I expected to happen. And we'd say, well, good, but it doesn't work that way today, so go on. So anyway, they got the whole mental model of how this was supposed to work. And then their kind of frustrations lay around the fact that it didn't work the way they expected it to work in certain situations. Ah, yes. There we go. So here's our left-handed user. Some people would use, this person being left-handed was able to go to a bimanual mode. But most people just, I can step back through the slides, hold the pen. Let's see if I even have a pen up here. I don't. But they hold the pen in their hand while they're touching the Xeel. I'll step back in a minute and show you. example of that.
No.
They use it.
While holding their hand, they use their fingers on the device.
Let me see if I can find that. Wasn't that back a couple?
Yeah, it was back towards right
There you go. That's pretty standard, and I like the contrast of these two as well, because some people are grabbers. You know, they really put their hand round behind it and want to use their thumb like a cell phone kind of operation. And some people are more, you know, poke from the top type people. I've seen cell phone users like that too. Some cell phone users are, you know, one-handed, and some are like that.
And what's interesting, so this is a non-scientific finding here, but something that was observed, though not measured, was that there seemed to be, at least in our small group, that there was a gender difference. And that men were using their thumbs and women were using their index fingers. This typified.
Yeah.
Does it necessarily have to be on that side of the tablet?
No.
So that's a good question, and I think you know, Mira's looked at the same question. User research that has gone on not from this task force, but from previous work in tablet at Microsoft, as well as at Compaq, shows that the ideal place on a tablet is kind of on the right-hand side, slightly above center, or slightly below center, or around center. There's some differing opinions about the location there, but both of those studies indicated that it should be on the right-hand side for both left-handed and right-handed users. The right-handed, so I was just reporting what these findings say, and you have other data that's good to share. What the rationale was that the right-handed users have the most dexterity in their right hand, and are navigating using that, and the left-handed users have more ambidextrous facility, and so can continue to use their pointing device with their left hand and not be hindered by using the nav device with their right hand.
My thought on that is that I'm an interaction designer and I use a lot of different graphics applications. And everything that I use, I'm always making chords with my left hand while either using a mouse or drawing on a tablet with my right. And so I think most designers or most people who would use it, I know you said it really wasn't for data input, but it usually works that way, and I know people who are left-handed use their mouse or their stock left-handed chord with their right.
When you start to expand the button set to include things like shift keys or alt and command keys, in fact, those are recommended to be on the left side because those are corded. You use those with the stylus or with the mouse. But when they're dedicated for navigation, they fall to the right hand. So there's a split between what kinds of keys go on which side of the device.
Somewhat related question. In all these studies, you always had the display in a landscape format. Did you ever look at rotation of the display?
Oh, no, I had it in portrait.
Or portrait, okay. Did you ever look at switching between landscape portrait mode?
You mean whether they, if you use it in landscape, do
buttons?
they, oh, what happens to the buttons? No, not in this.
Because an actual device, it's not going to be a Velcro attachment. It's got to be embedded.
Right.
And that's a really tough call. You know, you could put it in the corner, and then you compromise the use for both. And the Acer prototypes that we've got are in the corner, and so it's not particularly good for either. And it really comes down to the OEM deciding what's their primary market, what are they targeting, how are they thinking about their users' context to choose, you know, the best place for primary use.
Actually, there are good industrial designs which allow you to switch between, take this, it's like a module. You can switch this off of one right-hand side and put it on the left, or when you rotate it, actually on.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I mean, that's worth looking at. You run into all sorts of durability, hygiene, and manufacturability issues.
But on the tablet, you could, I haven't actually asked this question, but I don't know why you couldn't rotate the screen totally upside down and then remap the button. Yeah, I don't know why you couldn't have a left-handed mode. If they're on the side and in the middle and they're symmetrical.
You can, it's a module. You can take it off on one side and actually put it on.
Well, I'm saying don't even bother to physically remove it. Just flip everything, software.
You have a problem with the LCD for its viewing angle, but
Oh, yeah, yeah. See, that's why I'm not a hardware person. I need to learn more. I'm learning more. I'm coming to appreciate ergonomics and hardware more and more. In fact, let me just get, okay, also in study, did I get to that? Okay, there's our bimodal guy, or bimanual guy. Just to get kind of a rating out of people, this is not a marketing study, this was just to kind of get a rating from people about the value they saw in the different Xeels. And so the two to the right are the values that they gave for the tablet PC, and then this is on for the.
So don't pay attention to
the dollar amounts are.
What matters is the relative.
It's like
valuing
right.
between the devices.
So that it's just it's not a market question. It's just kind of give us a rating here, and so you can see they definitely like the Xeel device on the tablet. And particularly, it's called tilt-a-wheel there, but anyway, it's the wheel that clicks left and right.
So it was twice as important to them to have a dedicated nav device on a tablet than on a laptop. And they seem to value a wheel, even though they believe they performed equally well with a wheel and with buttons, they would value the wheel about 1.5 times that of the button-only interface.
Was that the tablet PC that has the laptop mode? Did they switch?
It was one with the switching modes. It's a question of when you're in that mode, how important is it to you to have them with you at that time?
Okay.
Yeah, we didn't have them actually do, on a day-to-day usage where you'd sometimes have it in laptop mode and sometimes have it in tablet mode. You just put it in tablet mode.
Was desirability synchronous with performance? Did people rate these as well as they actually helped them?
The performance?
No.
Yeah, no.
No, well, the performance was fairly flat across the different devices, but people would rate them desirability much greater delta.
We would have to really get at performance, we'd have to do instrumentation because their success rate is so high. And because of the style of the study, we weren't trying to collect accurate task time.
The performance measures study will be in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
If you want to sit and watch people do tasks over and over and over again.
I know with desirability, sometimes, there's a sweet spot where below it people feel like they're getting shortchanged. Like if you tell them we have these features, how about if we leave them out? They feel like they're being left out of something, even if they don't actually need them or want.
Yeah, oh yeah. People buy VCRs with way more features than they ever use. Study 3, we were trying to work towards more of a ergonomic kind of study where we explored 3 different forms. And again, we wanted them to use it in more of a mobile context or a casual posture. We looked at, again, the wheel with the side switches, the 7-button wheel, which is not shown here, the remote control style, and then a Xeel with a wide roller. And I won't spend a lot of time on this because essentially what we found out is that with the rough prototypes, as great as all the work that went into them was top-notch, but they just weren't really up to it. So doing any decent comparisons. So basically the study was kind of a wash, except we did replicate the prior success that we had. The various navigation tasks, their feelings of usefulness and so on were all replicated, but it didn't really answer the question we want about the ergonomics, and that's why we've got this study coming up in a couple weeks. And but as we went through these studies, we were able to kind of make a list of things that work well with the Xeel and things that specification and things that don't work so well. I'm really excited about getting my prototype device because using Outlook with the Xeel is just a pleasure. It works. There's a few things in there, but basically it's a pleasure. You can get among the tabs. You can scroll through your messages, your message list, your messages. You can open, you can close. In Internet Explorer, you can just sit there and scroll up and down, no problem. And especially with the pen, it's a very natural if you are browsing the web or even doing it for a productivity reason, it's very natural to use to scroll up and down and then touch the links that you want to use and use the back button and so on. File browser, opening, closing files, so on, works fine. There are places, though, as I've already mentioned, where there's kind of inconsistencies or impossible things that, hey, I just can't open my attachment from inside my email. That sucks. So where there's some inconsistencies, hierarchies, the folder list in Outlook versus directory tree and File Explorer operate differently. As I said, can't open your attachments. Down there where I say cannot scroll horizontally in Internet Explorer, okay. Well, that's because what we're talking about is hitting, it's kind of that 80-20 rule again. 80% of the time, or maybe more, you don't need to do horizontal scrolling on your web pages. So that's okay if we don't include horizontal scrolling. People, in my opinion, it's usually bad interfaces that require you to scroll left and right. Maybe Excel, but we're talking about narrow application.
That would not be true if you're looking at a smartphone.
At a what?
That would not be true if you're looking at a Pocket PC or a smartphone.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, okay.
So that's, it's a good example. When we look at the desktop and we say, what's the trade-off? If we have a center nav device which can go 4 directions, and we choose a primary direction which is continuous and a secondary which is discrete, well, the primary one is scrolling the view, and the secondary axis is jumping from link to link. If we swapped that secondary axis for horizontal scrolling, well, great, you'd be able to slide this thing all over the place, but you could never activate the links with the button-only interface. So that's where that prioritization was made. So, so it gets to the question of, okay, what do you do on the Pocket PC when you've got this sliver of the page? How are you going to get around?
Touch on the fact that there's a separation between the focus and the scroll position. And so today, I'm kind of curious, when you say it's great for reading messages in Outlook, I'm curious, what does it mean to scroll the wheel? Are you moving the selection? Or
so we can, we're going to show you a quick demo. We're kind of running out of time. I'll give you a really quick view, and why there are differences between the wheel on the mouse and a wheel in Xeel, and they do different things, but from a user experience standpoint, it's not a broken difference between the two of them. They're doing the right thing in the right context.
We can follow up later. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, take it away.
Actually, I have one quick question about that before you take that slide down. What do you think is more important, the consistency in ergonomics or the consistency in the interaction primitives that you've defined?
The interaction primitives. Because people, you quickly adapt, let's say, to the little mini keyboards, and then you go back to your regular key. You quickly adapt to that kind of thing, the physical part. But it's, it's the gotchas in the well-learned habits that suddenly go bash, and you suddenly get smacked in the face. That's the hard part.
So the next study that's going to run on the 18th, 19th, and 20th is going to look at comparing these 4 layouts. We've got prototypes of comparable resolution and same position. So the reach of the thumb is identical on all 4 of these. The button-only interface, the wheel, which tilts, this wide, very small wheel. Some of you may have seen this in the Stinger phone. And this is the one that we're building our 100 HDK prototypes out of, and a touch strip. One thing that we've seen is that if you go with a button-only interface, you've got some cognitive dissonance by having these look like 4 directions that are equal to each other. People expect to be able to move left and right as they do up and down, when in fact that's not what we're recommending the mapping be. So a device like this, or even this one, will hold to the software mapping better. So does anyone know how to switch displays? What's that? I didn't do anything. Oh. Cool. Touch-free. It's voice activated. See if it wakes up. Hello. Hopefully it hasn't fallen completely asleep. I have to log in. Well, there it goes. I'm going to describe to you instead the issue that you asked about, which is, what's that? It's blue screen, wake up, checking all the...
Well, specifically, I'm kind of, for example, the web TV did a great job 5 years ago or 6 years ago in connecting focus and scroll position and putting it all in an interface that allows essentially a button-only interface.
Right.
So you can move up and down through a web page. You're simultaneously scrolling and moving the focus over a link.
Yes.
I mean, if you wanted to let someone browse, wouldn't one solution be to pursue that sort of interface?
Yeah, absolutely. The problem on the desktop is that we don't have the kind of proxy intermediate that Web TV has. So Web TV, all those pages come through the Web TV servers. They get relayed out so that the tab order is something that's sensical and easy to navigate within a particular context. If you try tabbing through any web page today, you'll start and you'll tab up, maybe jump over here, then up here, then over here, then over here, and then back up here. So they do a bunch of pre-processing that takes all of that, throw away the tab order, and make it something that you can navigate with the D-pad, so that it then goes
Sure, but
chunk,
why
chunk.
can't you do that? I mean, IA could do that just as easily, right?
Sure. So that would be absolutely the right thing to do to make it work better with a dedicated device. And I think the same thing for Pocket PC as a way of limiting the number of variables that the user has to control.
So, I mean, you know, I'm curious what you see. You've talked about tablets and sort of alternative devices like a Pocket PC, a phone, a watch. I'm not clear what your intention is for Xeel with regards to a standard desktop PC or a laptop. Do you anticipate that this is something you expect to have built into a mouse or a keyboard? Is this uninteresting?
No, we see this on the side of a keyboard more than on a mouse, and potentially on a laptop. But more importantly than a laptop is when the laptop is in the slate form factor of the tablet. Because when you've got the full keyboard in front of you, you can use a lot of the keys that you've got to do your navigation. The question which you asked earlier, which is the distinction between what the mouse scroll wheel does, is it scrolls the view behind the cursor, right? Is it coming up or not? So I'm going to wave my hands here. That's okay. So we can come back to the other display, and I'll just talk to this point. You may be able to get it up after. Well, I don't know. I can try and poke at it, but nothing seems to be happening here. Got a red light on my display. The mouse wheel moves the content behind the cursor. So what that allows you to do, let's say in the message pane, you've got a number of messages indicated by fingers here. You're over message 1, and you scroll with the mouse wheel. It moves these up, and now you can click on message 4. So you've got this great combination of the mouse buttons and the wheel, and you never had to move the mouse itself, right? Now, the difference here is that without the pointing device that we have any control over, we really act as if there is no pointing device with Xeel. So when you roll that wheel, it doesn't do us any good to move the scroll if you have selections in question. So instead what it does is it moves the highlight down to number 4. So when you hit enter, you actuate on 4. Yes. All right. So in the the file hierarchy or the message list, scrolling, stepping up and down moves the items up and down. But down in the bottom right pane, it actually scrolls it because it's the whole view which is in question as opposed to the items.
So if I have a page that's longer than the physical screen that I'm looking at, and there are links at the top that go all the way down to the bottom,
right?
You would first scroll down to the bottom, and then it would scroll back up to the first link, and then start moving down the link.
Well, there's two different ways of navigating an HTML page. One is with the scrolling, so it's a stepping up and down, and the other is by skipping next and previous. Skipping next and previous jumps from link to link to link. And unless we've reformatted the order of those links, it's just going to follow the tab order that was authored into the page, which is not a great way to navigate. So on a device where you have a pointing device and the wheel, they work well in conjunction with each other. Scrolling on a tablet is really hard to do with a pen for targeting reasons and for tracking reasons. But being able to scroll with your thumb is a very easy thing to do. So you scroll to find what's significant to you, and then you poke the link with your hand. Did you have a question?
Will the focus ever be off screen?
Focus shouldn't ever be off screen. No.
To the app or the services you guys are providing?
It's up to the app. Yeah, so there should always be something in focus so you can move between. And I'm going to skip through this stuff fairly quickly. A lot of this is in the spec, so how we talk about navigating between multiple panes, moving up and down an array, or like a menu or a list, hierarchical lists, expand and contract using the enter key. We've found that there are a number of different ways that people have implemented hierarchical lists. Everything from right arrow, left arrow, to enter to open and close them, to tab, to arrow up, arrow down. I mean, it just runs the gamut. If you can imagine a way that it's implemented, it's been implemented somewhere. And even in the same application, it's done 2 or 3 different ways. So we're recommending a single way that it's done so that you can use the device to do it. Yeah?
How would you deal with a control that's a hierarchical list where each item not only is it apparent, but it's also selectable, and it might have a checkbox? I use an app every day that has that.
Say again?
Each item has a little checkbox next to it that can be turned on and off, and the item can open up to show children.
So that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. It's has to be looked at and say, is it a priority to be able to do all of that functionality with a dedicated nav device, or are we now in a complex enough environment that we should pick up a random run device and engage with it? So I'm curious what context that is you're talking about.
One is an existing app called 3D Studio, which is obviously a fringe app, and the other is a research thing I'm developing where I need that functionality.
Okay.
But that would be a consumer app that I'm working on.
Yeah. Well, in most cases that we've evaluated, I mean, not to say that cases like yours don't exist, and they certainly do, where content is associated with children as opposed to with parents, and the opening and closing of those children is independent from having a secondary state associated with it, like a checkbox. So
it's fairly common to see in setup apps, you'll see the kind of list he's talking about where
for an installer,
there's a bunch of components, and you can select a checkbox next to the component to hit all of it, or expand it out and pick individual subcomponents.
Yeah, so that's not an everyday interaction, nor is it a casual or particularly mobile interaction. So it's one where you're sitting at your desk, you've got the full complement of control devices. say that's an easy place to say, pick up the mouse, do all that detail, because you're not doing that over and over in a way that you're focused on some content other than that activity. Two-dimensional arrays depend on whether you've got multiple panes or not. So the green view on top is a cell phone view, and it is a single pane. So your left, right, up, and down can move that that point around, from the 16th down to the 23rd over to the 24th. Whereas the purple view is of the desktop. If you have multiple panes, well, then you need to be able to have auto wrap. So you go from 15 to 16 wraps up to 17 because your left and right is allocated to moving between panes. Talked about jumping from link to link. If it's an editable document, which is really not the focus of this work, you change your tab functionality to right arrow, left arrow. So we're not doing any destructive or constructive actions in an existing document. So it would then move the I-beam. Similarly, the Enter key shouldn't be putting carriage returns in the middle of Word if you're navigating. Talked about dialog boxes and control groups a little bit before. Spinners and combo boxes have a little bit of a difference between the smartphone and the desktop. We think of drop-down menus on the desktop dropping down, so it's a vertical list. So we can jump from group to group, being list to list with our next previous, and then navigating up and down within the list. Whereas on the phone, these things are conceptually, so the phone is the bottom example. They're a list that spins left and right. So you're rolling up and down moves you from group to group, and your left and right moves you between those items. So the different players that we've got, I mentioned all these before, centered obviously in the Hardware Innovation Group and the tablet PC, but Windows is well on board. And Mira has been interested. We've been talking to them. eHome facing some challenges with the large number of grids that they have on a regular basis. So looking at how does that tune to be a D-pad plus a left and right, perhaps. Office as early stages of engagement with them. And Smart Personal Objects, the Zenith guys are all good. Pocket PC, smartphone, we've got a little bit of work to do to get some of our orientation. And obviously the hardware groups. To help with this process, we're putting together hardware development kits. The first run, I'm building 100 of these. They're small. They're about this big. They're actually exactly this big. This one is cardboard. We'll have some real ones with plastic and silicon in about a week. And they're USB snap-on. They have a mounting plate so you can attach it to a tablet or to the side of the screen on a laptop, or stick it on your desk next to the keyboard. And it's got custom control panel for mapping the keys, and you can try it out for your app to see what are the appropriate modes. We'll have those for distribution ready by the end of the month. And two other resources for you guys. One is the project site, where we keep all the artifacts of the work, so the specifications, the white papers, the user research docs. We'll get the latest user research docs from Barbee posted in the next day or so. All the information on the prototypes, the hardware. If you're manufacturing things and you want to get similar parts, we've got contact information for those guys. And some archives of communications where we made some key decisions. The other thing is doing workshops. So I've been going around the company, and Barbee's been going around the company, Bert Keeley, and meeting with the different groups and reviewing specs and looking at work in progress to say, hey, is this compliant? Is this working? Or is this a place we need to stretch the spec? And how does it work with other people? So providing this center of review so the different groups can make sure that they're working consistently with each other. So that website is innovate/Xeel. Yeah.
describe more the relationship between, elaborate on how this would work as part of a keyboard? A number of the buttons that you've described overlap with either buttons that are already on, like the natural keyboard,
Sure.
Pro,
Right.
or keys. So do you anticipate, for example, how do you reconcile a out button with a back button and an escape button, escape key? Or do you expect that all three of those would be on the keyboard?
What will probably happen is we'll end up recommending that the back button be replaced by the full functionality of the out. So it'll combine those two in one. The other keys can cluster together and go onto the side of the keyboard. So if you guys are familiar, this is a whiteboard, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Writing on real walls. The Office keyboard, which has your key group, your 10 key, and then it has a wheel and some other buttons, is to take and replace this functionality, or a portion of that, with the Xeel functionality.
Okay, so you mentioned that back you expect would be sort of subsumed by this out button. How about the enter button? You expect there to be an enter key and an enter button?
No, they're exactly the same. The difference is that on the Xeel device, the enter is sending out app command enter overloaded with an enter button if you don't read app command enter. And the only reason you need app command enter is in cases like Word in reading mode, in composition mode as opposed to reading mode, where you don't want it to be putting carriage returns in. So it should be able to hear the app command enter and either do nothing or figure out something else smart to do. The others are pretty straight maps. I mean, legacy apps will all get arrow up, arrow down, tab, shift tab, enter, app command back. And if they don't read app command back, they're going to get an escape. So they're standard events.
Is there any proprietary intellectual property associated with this? Like button to control mapping and stuff like that. Does Sony have any for their wheel keyboards?
We haven't done a full evaluation. I don't believe there's any patent IPR in here unless we wanted to do a heavily dependent claim Latin document, which isn't particularly useful. It's like the very specific embodiment. Perhaps there's copyright on the cluster. I sense that the real value here is in implementation power and shipping these things and being consistent and getting it out there.
So we can freely match that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other questions? Well, if you think of any, I'm Eric Baer at Microsoft. It's just my name. And Barbee T, Microsoft. So thanks for coming, guys.